my God, this man is cheating on me.
They say the people you love the most are the only ones who can truly destroy you. A stranger can hurt your feelings. An enemy can wound your pride, but only the ones who know your deepest secrets, your childhood fears, the sound of your real laugh, only they know exactly where to aim the knife. For Sarah Mitchell, that knife came from two directions at once, and by the time she pulled it out, she had lost not just her husband, but her sister, her best friend, and the entire story of who she thought she was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. There is a specific kind of quiet that settles into a house just before everything falls apart. It is not the peaceful quiet of a home at rest. It is the quiet of a held breath, the world waiting for the other shoe to drop. For 42-year-old Sarah Mitchell, that quiet broke on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, not with a scream or a slammed door, but with the soft chime of a notification lighting up the screen of her husband's iPad, a device he had carelessly left behind on the kitchen counter. In that single moment, the life she had built for over 2 decades began its slow, silent collapse. She was standing there in her yoga pants and an old t-shirt, thinking about what to make for dinner, when her entire future shifted on its axis without warning. The sun was streaming through the windows, the dishwasher was running, the dog was sleeping in his bed by the back door, and everything was exactly as it should be, except it was not and would never be again. The name on the message was Claire, and the preview read simply, "Last night was perfect. Same time next week with a kiss." Sarah stood frozen in her own kitchen, the morning coffee growing cold in her hand, reading those words over and over until they lost all meaning. She thought of David, her husband of 22 years, the father of her two teenage children, the man who had held her hand through her mother's funeral, and who still sometimes brought her coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. She thought of the long hours he had been working lately, the late meetings, the weekends consumed by projects at the office, and how she had convinced herself it was dedication, that he was building something for their future. She thought of the way he had seemed distant lately, distracted, how he jumped when she came up behind him, how he kept his phone face down on every surface. She had asked him about it once, and he had laughed it off, told her she was imagining things, told her she was being paranoid and insecure, and she had believed him because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative was unthinkable. The betrayal was a knife to the chest, sharp and immediate, but the deeper wound, the one that would never quite heal, was still waiting in the shadows. She just did not know it yet. For 3 agonizing days, Sarah carried the weight of that message alone. She went through the motions of her life, making dinners, helping with homework, smiling at David across the table while her mind raced with questions she was terrified to ask. She checked phone bills, scrolled through bank statements late at night, and found charges for hotels she had never been to, restaurants she had never eaten at, flowers she had never received. She found photos on his computer, not of Claire, but of their family, their vacations, their life together, and she wondered how he could look at those pictures and then go meet another woman. She drove past the bar where the messages suggested David had been spending his evenings, and she sat in her car across the street for 3 hours until she saw him walk out with his arm around a woman who was not her. She saw them together, David and a younger woman with long hair, his hand resting on the small of her back with an ease that spoke of long familiarity, and she watched them kiss goodbye like teenagers, like two people who could not get enough of each other, like her marriage had never existed at all. She followed them that night, not because she had a plan, but because she could not make herself stop. She watched them go to a restaurant downtown, the kind of place with candlelight and white tablecloths where she and David used to go before the kids were born. She watched him hold the door for Claire, watched him touch her elbow as they walked to their table, watched them lean toward each other across the table like magnets, and she felt something inside her crack open that she did not know could break. She sat in her car in the parking lot, the engine off, the windows fogging up from her breath, and she wondered if this was who David had always been, if she had just been too blind to see it, or if somewhere along the way he had become someone else entirely. She thought about their wedding day, about the way he had cried when she walked down the aisle, about the vows they had written themselves, about forever and always and through thick and thin. She thought about the night each of their children was born, the way he had held her hand and told her she was amazing, the way he had looked at their bobbies like they were miracles. She thought about all the ordinary days, the grocery shopping and school runs and lazy Sundays on the couch, and she wondered if any of it had been real, or if he had been living a double life from the very beginning. It was a gut punch, but Sarah was not ready to crumble, not yet. She needed someone to talk to, someone who had known her forever, someone who would hold her while she fell apart, and so she drove to the one person she trusted above all others, her younger sister Rachel. Rachel had always been Sarah's anchor. 7 years younger, she had been less a sibling and more like a daughter to Sarah after their parents divorced when Rachel was just 12. Sarah had helped her with homework, bought her first prom dress, and talked her through every heartbreak and job loss. They spoke on the phone every single day, and Sarah was the godmother to Rachel's little boy. When Rachel went through her own divorce 5 years ago, Sarah had been there every night, bringing food, watching her son, holding her while she cried. They had a bond that other sisters envied, the kind of connection that seemed unbreakable, the kind you build over decades of shared history and unconditional love. Their childhood had not been easy. After the divorce, their father moved across the country and started a new family, and their mother worked double shifts to keep food on the table. Sarah had essentially raised Rachel, teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with math homework, chasing away the boys who broke her heart. She had taken Rachel to get her first bra, had been there when she got her first period, had held her hair back when she drank too much at a high school party. They had shared a bedroom for years, staying up late talking about their dreams, about the men they would marry, about the families they would have, about how they would live near each other and raise their kids together and grow old sitting on each other's porches. Sarah had never doubted that Rachel would be there for her, had never questioned the foundation of their relationship, had never imagined a world in which Rachel was not her person. So when Sarah sat in Rachel's car that rainy night and poured out the whole ugly story, the texts, the woman at the bar, the years of lies, the hotel receipts, the way David had made her feel crazy for asking questions, she expected Rachel to erupt with rage. She expected her sister to be as outraged as she was, to validate her pain, to tell her she deserved so much better, and that they would get through this together like they had gotten through everything else. She expected Rachel to cry with her, to curse David's name, to offer to go with her to confront him, to be the sister she had always been. Instead, there was a pause, a long, terrible pause that stretched into an eternity. Rachel looked at her with an expression Sarah could not quite read, something flickering behind her eyes that was there and gone too fast to name. Rachel reached over and took her hand. She told her she deserved so much better, that men were trash, that she should go home and get some sleep. It was good advice, the kind of advice a loving sister gives, but it was also a lie, and Sarah felt it in her bones even then. She just could not name it yet. Something would not let Sarah rest that night, grief maybe, or instinct, that ancient part of us that knows when danger is near even when our minds refuse to accept it. She could not sleep. She could not stop packing, and around midnight she decided to go back to Rachel's house. She just needed to be near someone who understood, someone who was on her side. She needed to hear Rachel say again that she would get through this, that she was strong, that her sister loved her. She needed the comfort of familiar walls and familiar arms and the one person in the world who had never let her down. She pulled up to the house and parked down the street, and that is when she saw it, David's truck, parked right there in her sister's driveway like it belonged there, like it had been there 100 times before. She sat in the dark for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles went white, telling herself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he had come to talk to Rachel about fixing the marriage. Maybe Rachel had called him to yell at him for her. Maybe this was some kind of intervention they had planned together. She told herself all the things a desperate woman tells herself when the truth is too ugly to face. She got out of the car and walked up to the front door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. And through the window, she saw them, not fighting, not arguing, but sitting close together on the couch, drinking wine, their body language speaking a language of intimacy that required no words at all. Rachel was leaning into him the way she leaned into no one, and David had his arm around her shoulder like she belonged there, like this was normal, like this was home. They were laughing about something, their heads closed together, and Sarah saw Rachel reach up and touch his face in a gesture so familiar, so casual, that it could only mean one thing. The front door was unlocked, almost as if they had been expecting someone else, someone who was not supposed to be there at that hour. Sarah pushed it open, and the scene inside froze like a photograph, David and Rachel jumping apart, guilt written on David's face, but Rachel, her baby sister, her best friend, looking back at her with an expression that mixed pity with something else, something that looked almost like defiance. In that single, shattering moment, the betrayal doubled. It was not just another woman. It was the other woman, her own flesh and blood. And from the way they sat there, comfortable in their shared secret, it had clearly been going on for a very long time. Sarah stood in the doorway, the rain dripping from her coat onto Rachel's hardwood floor, and she felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She heard herself make a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and she watched as Rachel's face shifted from defiance to something that looked almost like relief, as if she was glad the secret was finally out, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The questions came out in a torrent: how long, why, how could you? And the answers were worse than any silence could have been. Rachel admitted she had known about the affair with Claire from the very beginning. David had told her months ago, needing someone to confide in, and Rachel had become his sounding board, his alibi, his cover. She had lied to Sarah's face over and over again, had sat across from her at Sunday dinners knowing the truth, had held her while she cried about David working too much, and told her she was lucky to have such a dedicated husband. Somewhere between comforting her sister and talking to her brother-in-law, the lines had not just blurred, they had disappeared completely. Rachel said it had started innocently, just conversations, just someone to talk to, and then one night after Sarah had gone to bed early, David had shown up at Rachel's door saying he needed to talk, and one thing had led to another, and by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late to stop. David tried to explain, tried to say that it did not mean anything, that he still loved Sarah, that Rachel was just someone he could talk to, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Sarah looked at him, this man she had loved for half her life, the father of her children, the keeper of her secrets, and she felt nothing but a cold, hard emptiness where her heart used to be. She looked at Rachel, her sister, her best friend, the person she had protected and cherished and loved unconditionally, and she saw a stranger. She saw someone who had smiled at her across dinner tables while carrying this secret, someone who had held her while she cried and never said a word, someone who had sat in church with her on Christmas Eve and taken communion like she had nothing to hide. She wondered how long Rachel had been pretending, how many family gatherings had been performances, how many times Rachel had laughed at her jokes and meant something else entirely. Sarah walked out of that house and left them both behind. She drove through the rain with no destination in mind, finally pulling over on the side of a dark road and putting her head against the steering wheel as the sobs tore through her. She sat there for hours, the rain pounding on the roof, her phone buzzing with calls from both of them that she could not answer, and she wondered how she had been so blind, how she had missed every sign, how the two people she trusted most in the world could do this to her and still look her in the eye. She thought about every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every moment when Rachel had smiled at her across the table while carrying this secret, and she wondered if any of it had been real, if Rachel had ever really loved her, if their whole relationship had been one long performance. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and therapists and sleepless nights. Sarah moved through her days like a ghost, going through the motions of life without actually living it. She told her children what was happening, watched their faces crumple with confusion and hurt, held them while they cried, and pretended to be strong when she was falling apart inside. She sat across from David in mediation sessions, listening to him apologize, listening to him blame stress and midlife crisis and 100 other things that were not his fault, and she felt nothing but exhaustion. She learned things about the affair that she had not known, that it had been going on for over a year, that Rachel had been to their house when Sarah was at work, that David had bought Rachel gifts with money from their joint account, that they had discussed running away together before deciding it was too complicated. She learned that her sister had been plotting a future with her husband while smiling at her across the dinner table, and the knowledge sat in her chest like a stone. The divorce was quiet, but the scandal was not. In their suburban New Jersey town, news traveled fast and people picked sides. David became the villain, which he was, but Rachel became something worse, a pariah, the sister who had stood up at the wedding, caught the bouquet, and then systematically dismantled her siblings' entire world. Sarah heard through mutual friends that Rachel had moved out of town, that she could not face the whispers and the stares, that she had taken her son and gone to live with their mother in Florida. She heard that David had married Claire, the woman from the bar, and that they had moved to a different state to start over. She heard that her children were struggling, that her son was acting out in school, that her daughter had stopped eating, and she blamed herself for every bit of it, even though she knew, logically, that none of this was her fault. The betrayal cut so deep because it came from two directions at once: the husband who had vowed to love her until death, and the sister who had promised to be her person forever. Sarah spent months just trying to get out of bed, her children tiptoeing around her grief, friends not knowing what to say, the whole town whispering behind her back. She would lie awake at night replaying every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every moment when Rachel had smiled at her across the table while carrying the secret, and she wondered how she had missed it, how she had been so blind to the person sharing her own blood. She thought about all the times Rachel had told her she was lucky to have David, all the times she had defended him when Sarah complained, all the times she had offered to watch the kids so they could have date nights. And she realized that Rachel had been facilitating the affair, creating opportunities for David to be with other women while positioning herself as the trusted ally. The therapy bills piled up alongside the legal fees, and Sarah learned things about herself she had never wanted to know, about her capacity for pain, about the way grief can live in your bones like a physical illness, about how loneliness feels different when it comes from someone still breathing. She lost weight she could not afford to lose. She stopped answering phone calls from friends who meant well but could not understand. She sat in her car in parking lots for hours just to feel something other than the constant ache. The worst part was the dreams. She would dream that Rachel called her and said it was all a mistake, that she loved her, that she was sorry, and she would wake up reaching for the phone before the reality crashed over her all over again. That was the cruelty of losing someone to betrayal rather than death. They were still out there living their life, still breathing the same air, still existing in the world, just completely and utterly inaccessible to you. She went to support groups for women who had been betrayed, sat in circles with strangers who understood her pain in ways her oldest friends could not. She listened to stories of infidelity and deception, of husbands who had lived double lives, of wives who had been blind for years, and she found some comfort in the knowledge that she was not alone. But none of those women had been betrayed by their sister. None of them understood what it was like to lose not just a marriage but a blood bond, not just a husband but a lifetime of shared memories. She tried to explain it to her therapist once, tried to articulate the unique pain of losing someone who had known her before she was fully formed, someone who carried the same genetic code, someone who was supposed to be part of her forever, and she could not find the words because there were no words for that kind of loss. Months turned into a year, then 2, then 3, and Sarah slowly, painfully began to rebuild. She sold the house because she could not walk through those rooms without seeing ghosts. She moved to a smaller place closer to her children's schools. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter because the dogs did not care about her past and loved her unconditionally. She learned to cook for one, to sleep in the middle of the bed, to laugh at movies again without feeling guilty about it. She made new friends, women her age who did not know the whole story and did not ask too many questions, and she started to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. But there was always a small part of her that remained guarded, a locked room in her heart that no one else would ever be allowed to enter, because she had learned the hardest lesson life can teach, that the people you love most are the only ones who can truly destroy you. She watched her children navigate their own healing, watched them struggle with the knowledge that their father had betrayed their mother and their aunt had been complicit. She sat with them through their anger and their confusion and their grief, held them when they cried, celebrated with them when they had good days, and tried to model a way forward that did not involve staying stuck in the past. She saw her son graduate from high school, watched him walk across the stage without his father in the audience because David had chosen not to come, and she felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow that their family had been reduced to this. She saw her daughter get her first job, fall in love, start building a life of her own, and she wondered if her children would ever fully trust anyone, or if they had inherited her guarded heart. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, almost exactly 5 years after that first notification changed everything, a letter arrived in the mail. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately, even after all that time, the familiar loops and curves of Rachel's penmanship, the same handwriting that had written her birthday cards and thank you notes and silly notes slipped under her door when they were kids. She held the envelope for a long time, turning it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the possibility inside. Part of her wanted to throw it away unopened, to protect the fragile piece she had worked so hard to build, but another part, the part that still remembered braiding Rachel's hair before school and staying up all night when she had the flu, needed to know what it said. She opened it slowly, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside her, the same way she had sat 5 years ago when this whole nightmare began. The letter was long, several pages of Rachel's careful handwriting, and it was full of apologies and explanations and justifications. Rachel wrote that she had been young and stupid, that she had never meant for any of it to happen, that David had pursued her, and she had felt special, and she had gotten in too deep before she knew how to get out. She wrote that she had wanted to tell Sarah 100 times, 1,000 times, but she had been too afraid of losing her, which Sarah read with a bitter laugh because that was exactly what had happened anyway. She wrote that she had ended things with David before Sarah ever found out, that she had been trying to protect her from the truth because she thought knowing would hurt more than not knowing, and Sarah had to put the letter down at that point because the excuses were too much to bear. Rachel wrote about her own pain, her own guilt, her own suffering over the years, about how she had lost Sarah and it was the worst thing that had ever happened to her, about how she thought about her every single day, about how she was begging for a second chance, about how she missed her sister and she would do anything to make it right. She wrote that she had been in therapy for years, that she understood now how much damage she had caused, that she would spend the rest of her life trying to make it up to Sarah if only she would let her. She wrote about their childhood, about the memories they shared, about the bond that had once been unbreakable, and she asked if there was any way to find their way back to each other. She wrote about their mother, who was getting older, who asked about Sarah all the time, who did not understand why her daughters could not just work things out. She wrote about her son, Sarah's nephew, who had grown into a young man who asked about his aunt constantly, who did not understand why his family was broken. Sarah read the letter 3 times, once to absorb the words, once to look for the lies, and wants to search for something real beneath the apology. She sat at that table for hours as the afternoon turned to evening, and the evening turned to night, thinking about all the years they had shared, all the memories that belonged to both of them, all the ways Rachel had been woven into the fabric of her life since before she could remember. She thought about the good times, the sleepovers and secrets and inside jokes, the way Rachel used to call her just to say nothing at all, the way they could finish each other's sentences and laugh at things no one else found funny. She thought about the bad times too, the fights they had survived, the ways they had hurt each other and made up and come back together stronger, because that was what sisters did, that was what family meant. But then she thought about the worst time, the moment she had stood in Rachel's living room and watched her sister's face crumble into that mixture of pity and defiance, the years of lies that had come before it, the way Rachel had smiled at her across dinner tables and held her while she cried and never said a word. She thought about all the times she had defended Rachel to other people, all the times she had put her first, all the ways she had loved her unconditionally, and she wondered if Rachel had ever really loved her back, or if she had just been convenient, just been there, just been someone to use. She thought about trust, and how once it is broken, it can never really be repaired. No matter how much glue you use, no matter how carefully you hold the pieces, the cracks will always show. She thought about forgiveness, and what it really meant. She had spent years in therapy learning to forgive herself, learning to let go of the guilt she carried for not seeing the signs, learning to accept that she had been a victim of deception, not the cause of it. She had learned that forgiveness was not about the other person. It was about releasing yourself from the prison of anger and resentment. She had forgiven David in a way, not because he deserved it, but because holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. But forgiveness and reconciliation were two different things, and she was not sure she could ever let Rachel back into her life, not after everything that had happened. The next morning, Sarah did something that surprised even herself. She took the letter out to the backyard, to the small patch of grass behind her new apartment where she sometimes sat with a book on Sunday afternoons. She struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper, watching as the flame caught and spread, consuming Rachel's words, Rachel's excuses, Rachel's pleas for forgiveness. The paper curled and blackened and turned to ash, and Sarah watched until the last ember died, and there was nothing left but a small pile of gray dust that the wind would soon carry away. She realized in that moment that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation, that you can let go of anger without letting someone back in, that some bridges do not need rebuilding. They need to be burned so you finally stop trying to cross them. The affair had ended her marriage, but the silence, the years of lies and cover-ups had ended her sisterhood, and some bonds, once broken that completely, can never be tied back together again. She stood there for a long time after the ashes cooled, thinking about Rachel, about David, about all the people who had hurt her, and all the people who had helped her heal. She thought about her children, who had become strong and resilient despite everything, who had learned from her example that you can survive even the worst betrayals. She thought about the friends who had shown up for her, the ones who had brought food and sat with her in silence and never asked for anything in return. She thought about the therapist who had helped her untangle the knots in her mind, who had taught her that her worth was not determined by the people who failed to love her properly. She thought about the dogs at the shelter, who greeted her every week with wagging tails and unconditional love, who asked nothing of her except that she show up and be present. In the years since, Sarah has found a kind of peace she never thought possible. She watches her children grow and graduate and start lives of their own. She has friends who love her and a little dog who thinks she hung the moon. She volunteers at the shelter and reads books and takes herself out to dinner sometimes just because she can. She still thinks about Rachel, especially on holidays and birthdays and the anniversary of the day everything changed. But the thoughts are softer now, less like knives and more like old photographs you look at and remember but do not reach for. She understands now that some people are only meant to be in your life for a season, even when you thought they would be there forever, and that loving someone does not mean you have to let them keep hurting you. The hardest truth she learned was that Rachel probably did love her, in her own broken way, but love was not enough. It had never been enough, and it never would be. She occasionally hears news of Rachel through mutual friends or family members, snippets of information that arrive like leaves blowing across her path. She heard that Rachel had remarried, a nice man from Florida who did not know about her past. She heard that Rachel's son had gone to college, that he was doing well, that he asked about his aunt sometimes. She heard that their mother had passed away, and that Rachel had handled the funeral arrangements alone because Sarah could not bring herself to be in the same room with her. She felt guilty about that sometimes, about not being there for her mother's final days, but she also knew that her mother had understood, had accepted that some wounds are too deep to heal, had loved both her daughters even when they could not love each other. She thought about writing back to Rachel sometimes, especially late at night when the world was quiet and her defenses were down. She would compose letters in her head, long letters full of all the things she had wanted to say for years, all the questions she still had, all the hurt that still lingered beneath the surface. But she never wrote them down, never put pen to paper, because she knew that some conversations are better left unhad, some doors are better left closed. She had spent years building a life that did not include Rachel, and she was not sure she wanted to tear down those walls, even for a moment. What do you think if you were Sarah? Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive a betrayal like that? Or would you let the fire take the letter too? Would you reach out after years of silence, or would you protect the peace you had fought so hard to find? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one and we want to hear your perspective on this story. Have you ever experienced a betrayal from someone you trusted completely? And if so, how did you find your way through it? We want to create a community here where people can share their stories and support each other, because none of us should have to carry these burdens alone. And if this documentary about hidden lives and shattered trust resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss our upcoming videos. We have more stories coming that will make you think about family and loyalty, and the secrets we keep from the people we love. Stories about marriages built on lies, about friendships that hid dark truths, about families torn apart by the very people who were supposed to protect them. We spend months researching each story, talking to experts, gathering every detail so that we can bring you the most complete and compelling narratives possible. Your subscription helps us continue this work, helps us tell the stories that need to be told, helps us build a community of people who believe in the power of truth. The affair ended the marriage, but the silence ended the sisterhood, and some questions have no easy answers. Was it worse because it was her sister, or is betrayal always this devastating when it comes from someone you trusted with your whole heart? Sarah still asks herself that question sometimes, still wonders if the pain would have been easier to bear if it had come from a stranger, if the wound would have healed cleaner if it had not been infected by family. She does not have an answer, and she has stopped looking for one. Some questions are not meant to be answered. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some pains are meant to be carried rather than cured. She thinks about Rachel on her birthday every year, not because she wants to, but because you cannot just erase 20 years of shared birthdays from your memory. She wonders if Rachel thinks about her too, if she regrets what she did, if she lies awake at night the way Sarah used to, replaying every moment and wondering how things might have been different. She hopes that Rachel has found peace, not because Rachel deserves it, but because carrying guilt forever is its own kind of prison, and Sarah does not wish prison on anyone, not even the person who hurt her most. She has learned that healing is not linear, that some days are good and some days are bad, that grief comes in waves, and sometimes the waves knock you down even when you think you have learned to swim. She has learned that you can love someone and still need to stay away from them, that you can forgive someone and still protect yourself from them, that you can miss someone and still know that being together would be a mistake. She has learned that family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up for you, who tells you the truth, who loves you enough to be honest even when honesty is hard. She has built a new family out of friends and neighbors and the people at the shelter, people who have no reason to love her except that she loves them back. And she has found that chosen family can be just as strong as blood family, sometimes stronger. She still has her moments, moments when the grief ambushes her out of nowhere, when she smells a perfume that Rachel used to wear or hears a song they used to sing together. In those moments, she allows herself to feel it, to sit with the sadness instead of pushing it away, to acknowledge that part of her will always miss the sister she thought she had. Then she gets up, makes herself a cup of tea, calls a friend, or goes to the shelter to spend time with the dogs, and she moves forward because that is all any of us can do. She has learned that you do not get over the big losses, you just get through them. One day at a time, one breath at a time, one small moment of joy at a time. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being here with us until the very end. We know that an hour and 45 minutes is a long time to ask of anyone, and we do not take your attention for granted. We poured our hearts into this story because we believe that these narratives matter, that they teach us something about ourselves and about the world we live in, that they remind us of the fragility of trust and the resilience of the human spirit. If you made it this far, please consider leaving a comment, not just for us, but for the other viewers who will read these comments and find comfort in knowing they are not alone. Share your own story if you feel comfortable, or just let us know where you are watching from and what you thought of Sarah's journey. We read every comment, and we are grateful for every single one of you who takes the time to be part of this community. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. The world can be a hard place, full of betrayals and broken trust, but it can also be a place of healing and hope and second chances. Sarah found her second chance not in reconciliation with her sister, but in rebuilding a life that was entirely her own, and maybe that is the most important lesson of all. You do not need anyone else to complete you. You do not need forgiveness from the people who hurt you to move forward. You do not need closure to find peace. You just need yourself and the willingness to keep going, one day at a time, until the days add up to a life worth living.